Good morning, everyone. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I ask unanimous consent for our colleague, Representative Custer, to participate in today's hearing should she be able to attend. Without objection, so ordered. Since we're working in a hybrid format today, just a few housekeeping reminders. If you're experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so it can be resolved immediately. And if you wish to have a document inserted into the record, ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email that over to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning today. This will make it easier for me to ensure that all members have an opportunity to be recognized. So hearing no questions, we will proceed. I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. Today's hearing is titled Progress Made, Ending Sexual Harassment at the Department of Veterans Affairs. We'll hear from two VA witnesses, Mr. Harvey Johnson, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion, and Ms. Perdita Johnson Abercrombie, Director of Operations for ORMDI's Eastern Region, as well as Mr. Thomas Costa of the Government Accountability Office, who's joining us virtually. Sexual harassment is a major problem within the department that affects the rights and well-being of VA employees. According to a 2021 survey from the Merit Systems Protection Board, an estimated 17% of VA's 400,000 employees experienced some form of sexual harassment in the preceding 2 years. Now, this well exceeds the government-wide average of 11%, and it may be the highest rate of sexual harassment across the entire federal workforce. I'm sure everyone in this room agrees that these figures show an unacceptable situation, and the severity and pervasiveness of sexual harassment within VA is not new. I wish I could say the department has done all it can throughout history, but despite very high levels of sexual harassment reported in anonymous surveys, once again, 17% of 400,000 employees, VA's own data says there were fewer than 500 formal reports of sexual harassment during a recent one-year period. The meaning of the numbers is clear. One of the least common responses by an employee who experiences harassment is to report that through official channels. Victims often fear no one will believe them, no action will be taken, or that they'll be blamed or socially ostracized. That means that too many employees are not getting the help that they need, and serious injustices are not being corrected. I'd like to acknowledge at the outset of the hearing that over the last 2 years, VA has made some progress. One of Secretary McDonough's first acts as secretary was to issue a policy statement making clear that he would, and I quote, not accept discrimination, harassment, or assault at any level at any facility within VA. This is a welcome and important statement. In March, the department issued a detailed set of harassment prevention procedures. I was glad to see that VA managers and supervisors are now finally required to centrally report all complaints of sexual harassment to the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion, which Mr. Johnson leads. There's also new mandatory training. However, as GAO will explain, VA has not taken other necessary steps. At a hearing more than 2 years ago on this topic, GAO testified that many employees do not report sexual harassment out of fear of retaliation or reprisal. More than half of VA employees were reportedly not confident that sexual harassment complaints would be resolved in a fair and just manner. GAO made 7 key recommendations, some addressing shortfalls in policies and procedures going back years. I have to express my frustration. It's 2 years later, and VA has only fully implemented 2 of these 7 recommendations. So let's talk about 2 priority recommendations in particular. A longstanding EEO Commission directive requires that, quote, the same agency official responsible for executing and advising on personnel actions may not also be responsible for managing, advising, or overseeing the EEO pre-complaint or complaint process. So this is for good reason. The same person shouldn't be in charge of both pursuing a sexual harassment complaint and defending managers. This is a clear conflict of interest. The EEOC put it this way in a July 2020 letter, one of several notices that VA has received dating back to 2017. They said, we're concerned that a perceived conflict of interest could have a chilling effect on employees' use of and or confidence in the EEO complaint process. Yet VA's department-wide Equal Employment Opportunity Director, the Assistant Secretary for Human Resources and Administration, who's ultimately in charge of harassment complaints, oversees both the EEO and personnel functions for the department. VA has refused to acknowledge or correct this blatant conflict that undercuts employees' confidence in how sexual harassment cases are addressed. Equally troubling, is the fact that the people tasked with receiving and responding to sexual harassment complaints at individual VA medical centers, not to the trained professionals at the Office of Resolution Management, but to their individual hospital administrators. This is about more than misplaced boxes on VA's organizational chart. This conflict erodes employees' faith that sexual harassment complaints will be handled in a prompt, thorough, and impartial manner. 2 years ago, VA officials told us that they were working to realign EEO program managers at VA hospitals, and they gave us a timeline. But now, even that sluggish timeline appears to be slipping. That's why I had invited the Deputy Secretary, Mr. Donald Remy, to participate in this hearing. He declined because of conflicts. The two VA witnesses here today have done an admirable job updating various policies and procedures, but with all due respect to Mr. Johnson and Ms. Johnson-Abercrombie, we need the decision-making authority to make the major structural changes that are needed, and that falls on the Deputy Secretary and the upper leadership at VA. So I'm concerned about his lack of absence here today and about the clear, decisive decision-making by VA leadership that we need, because I think that can send the wrong message in the absence of action to thousands of VA employees who have experienced sexual harassment. So I hope that today's witnesses have been empowered to share real actionable steps that are being taken now, not 2 or 3 years from now, to fix the department's structural deficiencies. VA's struggles with sexual harassment didn't begin with this administration, but current VA leadership has an opportunity to take the action now that would better position the department to prevent and address employee harassment moving forward. So thank you to all of our witnesses for your willingness to participate. We look forward to your testimony. That concludes my statement, so I'll now turn things over to Ranking Member Mann for his opening comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing. Nearly 2 years ago to the day, this subcommittee held a hearing with almost the exact same title. While some improvements have been made, we know that harassment still exists. One thing that was true then and is still true now is that mandatory training, while important, will not end sexual harassment. We need employees and veterans alike to treat one another with respect. And when sexual harassment does happen, despite all of the current mitigation strategies, VA management must be committed to holding employees accountable for their actions. Only through accountability can we end sexual harassment at VA. 2 years ago, the Government Accountability Office published a report on sexual harassment of VA employees. GAO made 7 recommendations, as was mentioned earlier by the chairman. VA has closed on only 2 of them. I'm very disappointed by the lack of progress. The department did not concur with 2 of GAO's recommendations regarding the alignment of the EEO director and the EEO program managers in VA medical centers. GAO is concerned this alignment creates a conflict of interest. VA disagrees. This debate has been ongoing for the past 2 years with little progress. But frankly, this debate was always unnecessary, and I'm glad that the House has taken action. I am pleased that earlier this Congress, we stepped in and passed legislation out of the House that would codify GAO's recommendation over the objections of the department. Unfortunately, the legislation is stuck in the Senate. Mr. Chairman, I hope that the House and Senate majorities can break the logjam and pass the legislation so that we do not continue to spin our wheels and have the same debate regarding the alignment of EEO directors. I want to close by saying I'm appreciative of the efforts of VA employees to end sexual harassment. Battling for this worthy cause can be overwhelming, and it can feel like everyone is a critic. But I think we all can agree that more can and should be done. While the issue of staff alignment is important, Congress has already ruled on that issue. Now we must turn to the heart of the matter, which is the leadership and the culture of failures at VA. VA Inspector General Missel has called VA's leadership disengaged and its culture dangerous. His words strike at the core of the issues before us today. I intend to make that the focus of my questions and effort. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll now yield to Chairman Takano, who's joining us here for this hearing. You're recognized for opening comments.
Well, thank you, Chairman Pappas, and I'd like to associate myself with the statement you gave to begin this hearing. The lack of progress in fully addressing sexual harassment at VA is disappointing. Equally important, what I see as a lack of prioritization by VA leadership is disheartening. I remember the 2020 subcommittee hearing that addressed these issues. I told the assembled witnesses at that time that I was growing impatient with VA's slow pace of reform on the issue of sexual harassment. Frankly, my comments were mild compared to what several Republican members, including my counterpart, Ranking Member Bost, had to say. Sexual harassment among the VA workforce is a bipartisan concern, and it has been a concern of this committee for many years. No one should be subjected to unwelcome sexual advances or should be made to endure teasing, joking, or derogatory comments based on their sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Unfortunately, these are issues that are all too many VA employees have had to deal with in the past and continue to deal with today. Well, let me highlight, if I may, several passages from a relevant Government Accountability Office report. Quote, alleged incidents of sexual harassment are underreported under VA's current system, end quote. And further quote, we found some areas that warranted attention, including evidence of lack of trust in management, fear of reprisal, or concerns about EEO complaint processing, end quote. And again, another quote, communications intended for all employees did not always reach them, end quote. And finally, GAO identified, quote, concerns about whether the investigation and resolution of EEO complaints were sufficiently independent of the management of VA medical centers, end quote. Now, I'm sorry to say that this is not a recent GAO report I'm reading from. This is a report that was issued in 1993, nearly 30 years ago. And yet, the department is still grappling with some of the very same sexual harassment issues. 2 years ago, we were told that a realignment of equal employment opportunity program managers, which had been underway at the Veterans Benefits Administration and the National Cemetery Administration since 2016, would not even begin to occur at the Veterans Health Administration until 2024. And we know that VHA is the biggest section of what we do at VA. And now, even with that ambitious goal, even with that unambitious goal, appears to have been, that unambitious goal has been further delayed. I agree that the two VA witnesses who are with us this morning should be commended for the steps they've taken to improve the tracking of sexual harassment complaints, to update employee training, and to revise procedural handbooks. But policies and procedures are only as good as the people who implement them. And what we've heard from all too many VA employees is there's still a lack of trust in the department's anti-harassment reporting structure. I know there's been renewed focus on harassment, discrimination, and whistleblower protection under this administration. But I want to echo Chairman Pappas in saying there is more that needs to be done. I share his concern, too, that the Deputy Secretary is not here to speak to these issues. He or someone at or near his level should be able to convey to this committee in a clear voice that GAO's outstanding recommendations on sexual harassment have the full attention of the department and will be swiftly implemented without further delay. It was communicated to us that the department does not want to set a precedent for the Deputy Secretary's appearance at subcommittee hearings. I find this odd, since the committee has a long history of having senior leadership appear before its subcommittees. Deputy Secretary Remy himself appeared before our Technology Modernization Subcommittee in November, and then Acting Deputy Secretary Pamela Powers testified before the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee's July 2020 hearing on sexual harassment issues at VA. Now, this is a topic that deserves the attention of the department's senior leadership, and the Deputy Secretary is the appropriate VA official to make some of the most important and necessary changes that both GAO and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have been recommending for years. Current VA leadership has a critical opportunity to give employees renewed faith that the harassment complaints will be handled in a fair and just manner. The time for talk on these foundational issues is way past due. We, as members of this committee, need to see some action. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Abercrombie, and Mr. Costa. I look forward to a productive discussion with you today.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. We're also joined by the chairwoman of the newly authorized Women Veterans Task Force, Julia Brownlee. I'll recognize you for any opening comments you may have.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and the rest of the subcommittee for holding today's very important hearing and including the Women's Veterans Task Force, and most importantly, its voice. First, as Chairman Pappas mentioned, I want to acknowledge the progress VA has made over the past 2 years on employee sexual harassment prevention. As you know, the Debra Sampson Act required VA to establish a comprehensive anti-harassment and anti-assault policy, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on VA's enactment of this policy. However, I am disappointed to have to be sitting here again, as I was in 2020, because VA's Equal Employment Opportunity Program is still not compliant with federal laws, regulations, and management directives. Many of the findings of the GAO are still unresolved. This continues to harm the ability of VA to bring justice and support to employees who experience sexual harassment. At the 2020 hearing, I voiced my concern that the VA's timelines to implement GAO's priority recommendations are taking way too long. Now, 2 years later, we're sitting here once again, and today I hope we will not be hearing the same promises and excuses. As we know, VA Deputy Secretary Remy declined to be here today. As a leader within the department, I'd expect the Deputy Secretary to lead from the front, take responsibility, and voice his commitment to immediately resolving this issue for VA employees. As far as I see, there is no sense of urgency, and that's a problem. The 2020 GAO report stated, absent additional action, some VA employees may continue to distrust VA's handling of sexual harassment allegations. There are additional reports that date back decades on this very subject, which exposed many of the same problems and distrust. For one, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission found that both the department-wide EEO director and the EEO program managers at VA are misaligned, creating the perception that there's a conflict of interest among the VA workforce. Furthermore, VA policies are not consistent throughout the agency and are missing crucial information, such as including all options employees have for reporting sexual harassment, not to mention the data collected from sexual harassment complaints and reports are incomplete. VA must create a culture where employees are not discouraged or stifled against reporting workplace harassment. I believe we all acknowledge that sexual harassment is underreported. The department leaders must work with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to implement compliant policies and procedures in order to ensure a safe, healthy, and supportive work environment for all our employees. For decades, VA employees have not trusted their leaders to properly handle this severe and pervasive issue. There continues to be a deficiency in both the application and clear documentation of corrective action. Survivors will continue to suffer without assurance that perpetrators of sexual harassment will be held accountable for their actions. Surveys by the Merit Systems Protection Board in both 2016 and 2021 found that VA employees experience more sexual harassment than any other federal agency. This is wholly unacceptable, and it's time to fix it. Advertising a policy for zero tolerance for sexual harassment or assault means nothing if it is not fully implemented. Employees rightfully expect and deserve better. I look forward to hearing from all the witnesses on what improvements have been made at VA and what is being done to address the changes that are still needed. Thank you again, Chairman Pappas, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. We have a single panel of witnesses for today's hearing. From the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have Mr. Harvey Johnson. Welcome. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. Mr. Johnson's accompanied by Ms. Perdita Johnson Abercrombie. Welcome. Regional Director of Eastern Operations for VA's Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. Both Mr. Johnson and Ms. Johnson Abercrombie lead the department's efforts to address allegations of harassment and discrimination among VA's workforce. We're also joined virtually by Mr. Thomas Costa, a director of the Government Accountability Office's Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team, where he oversees worker protection, safety, employment, and training issues for GAO. In addition to these assembled witnesses, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter I received earlier this week from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which identifies a number of deficiencies within VA's Equal Employment Opportunity Program and clearly states that VA's organizational structure doesn't comply with federal law. Without objection, so ordered. Before moving to witness statements, just a reminder to Mr. Costa, who's virtual, please pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so we fully capture your comments. With that, I now want to start by recognizing Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting us here today to discuss VA's efforts to prevent and effectively respond to sexual harassment and sexual assault. Joining me today is Ms. Perdita Johnson Abercrombie, our Director for Eastern Region of the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. We appreciate this opportunity to convey the commitment VA Secretary Dennis McDonough has to achieving an inclusive, welcoming environment for every veteran we serve and for our world-class workforce. VA thanks you for your partnership and continued commitment to our nation's veterans. In particular, we thank you for the Debra Sampson Act. This critically important legislation served as the catalyst for VA to increase our efforts to prevent and respond to sexual harassment and assault. We are pleased to discuss with you today our tremendous progress since passage of the Act and how VA is now going above and beyond to implement this law on behalf of all of our employees and the veteran customers we serve. Secretary McDonough issued a zero tolerance policy for sexual assault and harassment. This means that we expect and actively work to manage an organization free of such incidents. We believe that just reacting to sexual harassment and assault is not enough, and that we must achieve and sustain the cultural health of VA to prevent sexual harassment and assault. Today, you will hear us describe our efforts to do just that. VA now has clearly defined process for reporting gender-based harassment and sexual assault for all employees, contractors, veterans, and visitors. We now have a harassment prevention directive and a corresponding handbook. This handbook provides guidance, instructions, and mandatory procedures for VA organizations and key stakeholders at every level of the organization. VA now has the V-Signals Outpatient Safety Survey that is disseminated to veterans. The survey inquires generally about veterans' feelings of safety while attending appointments. Also, we have established a remediation program for facilities that have 5 or more substantiated complaints of sexual harassment and/or assault. And VA has refreshed and updated all harassment prevention training that now includes bystander intervention training for both veterans and employees. This past September, Secretary McDonough established the Secretary's Work Group on Sexual Assault and Harassment Prevention. The work group includes veteran service organizations, advocates, state directors of Veterans Affairs, tribal representatives, VA employees serving in a personnel capacity, and survivors of sexual assault and harassment. And finally, our White Ribbon Pledge program represents a unified national call to action to eliminate sexual harassment, sexual assault, and domestic violence across VA and surrounding communities. We have a White Ribbon VA champion at 100% of VA medical centers, and a toolkit was disseminated to facilities to support their local programming efforts. So far, about 60,000 veterans, employees, interagency, and community partners have taken the White Ribbon VA Pledge. VA has done so much in the past 2 years to address the cultural health. Most recently, we were named by the Partnership for Public Service as one of the top 5 best places to work in the federal government among large agencies, VA's first time ever in the top 5. We were also named the most improved large federal agency for 2021. In closing, veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors are the heart of America. having dedicated their lives to serving and sacrificing for this country, for all of us, in the times when we've needed them most. Now it's our job to serve them as well as they have served us by delivering timely access to world-class health care and earned benefits, and by honoring them with a final resting place that is a lasting tribute in a safe, welcoming environment. VA will keep fighting to do exactly that. We appreciate the continued support of this committee in achieving excellence for our nation's veterans, and we look forward to continuing to keep you apprised of our ongoing efforts. This concludes my statement, Chairman Pappas. My colleague and I would be happy to answer any questions from you and the members of this committee. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Costa, you're now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, Chairman Takano, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss the status of our June 2020 report recommendations on sexual harassment at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Sexual harassment negatively affects employees and employers, and if severe, can constitute unlawful discrimination. Our report reviewed VA's efforts to prevent and address sexual harassment of its employees. We found that some aspects of VA's policies and complaint processes hindered its efforts. Moreover, VA ranked among the federal agencies with the highest experience of sexual harassment, according to federal survey data. And based on our analysis of updated data from 2019 to 2021, VA continues to be ranked among those agencies. About 17% of VA employees say they've experienced sexual harassment, compared to 12% at other agencies. As a result of our work, we made 7 recommendations to improve VA structure, policies, data collection, and training. I will highlight first the 2 recommendations VA has implemented, and second, the 5 open recommendations and what more VA needs to do to address them. Related to the 2 closed recommendations, earlier this year, VA formalized its Harassment Prevention Program, or HPP, and finalized the handbook that outlines key steps for addressing sexual harassment allegations. VA also developed new mandatory trainings that included more information on sexual harassment and on the reporting methods available to employees, including HPP. 5 of our recommendations, however, remain open. First, we found that VA's EEO director position is misaligned with the EEOC directive that the official responsible for personnel actions is also not responsible for the complaint process. EEOC also noted that VA's EEO director placement violates the Elijah Cummings Act. We recommended that VA address this. However, VA has not provided a consistent answer as to whether it plans to do so. VA initially disagreed with our recommendation. Then in August 2021, VA changed its mind and said it agreed. In December 2021, VA indicated it was now only exploring options. And in July, VA again stated it disagreed with our recommendation. Having the same person in charge of oversight of personnel actions, such as disciplinary actions, and the EEO complaint process can create, at a minimum, the appearance of a conflict of interest and erode trust in the process. Moreover, VA's position appears at odds with itself. Policy requires that the head of the EEO process to be separate from personnel functions and to have a direct line to the head of the agency. VA states that its Assistant Secretary of Human Resources and Administration serves as both the head of personnel and the EEO director, which appears counter to policy. VA also states that EEOC agrees that the Deputy Assistant Secretary is the person with primary accountability for EEO process. However, the Deputy Assistant Secretary does not have a direct line to the Secretary. In fact, the Deputy is 4 steps removed from the Secretary, which, if the Deputy is truly in charge of the EEO process, also appears counter to policy. Second, VA's EEO program managers are also misaligned. VA has taken some steps to realign these positions and expects to be done in 2 of its 3 administrations by the end of the fiscal year. However, VA has not taken a consistent approach among its 3 administrations. In VA's statement today, the agency discusses a unified model throughout the agency to combat sexual harassment. Implementing our recommendation to make the EEO program manager position consistently aligned throughout the agency is one way to help achieve a unified model. Yet the Veterans Health Administration has no plan to realign their EEO program manager positions. Instead, VA stated it's considering reclassifying VHA's current EEO program managers. However, it's unclear how reclassifying them affects the potential conflict of interest if their duties remain the same. We and EEOC continue to believe that VA must ensure that VHA's EEO program managers report to the Deputy Assistant Secretary in charge of the EEO process and not facility managers. Third, while VA is developing procedures to conduct a review of its existing sexual harassment policies to make sure they are current and complete, they have not yet begun such a review. Fourth, VA has updated its policies to require that managers report all sexual harassment allegations and created a tracking system for complaints, both of which are positive steps. However, VA has not yet assessed the effectiveness of the tracking system or leveraged either its own internal or other external data to identify areas that need additional attention. And fifth, we recommended that VA ensure corrective actions decided on are actually implemented. However, VA has not taken all the necessary steps to ensure there is documentation of these actions and that this information is entered into its tracking system. Without doing so, VA can't be certain corrective actions are actually being implemented. VA has said they expect to address 3 of our 5 open recommendations by the end of this year. However, the 2 structural recommendations about the placement of EEO functions will likely remain open because VA has not agreed internally, agreed with our recommendations, or with the EEOC about whether or not it's in compliance with EEOC and legislative requirements. In conclusion, while VA has taken some steps to address our recommendations and combat sexual harassment, significant issues still hamper its ability to effectively protect its employees. Without taking additional steps to address our recommendations, some VA employees may lack trust in how VA handles allegations of sexual harassment, and the prevalence of sexual harassment at VA may remain high. This completes my statement. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costa. And without objection, the witness's written statements will be submitted into the record. We'll now turn to the questioning portion of today's hearing, and I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, maybe I can start with you. One thing's clear here. Everyone in this room understands the importance of addressing sexual harassment, and it also is clear that further action is needed to respond to continued high rates of harassment among VA's workforce. We know that 2 years ago, GAO made 7 recommendations that would improve handling of sexual harassment allegations, and as Mr. Costa testified to, only 2 of those recommendations have been implemented. So I want to focus on the 2 priority recommendations which remain unimplemented. Mr. Costa did detail how VA lacks reporting and leadership structure that gives its employees confidence that sexual harassment complaints will be handled in a fair and impartial manner. These recommendations are based both on legal requirements and government-wide best practices. So, Mr. Johnson, we've learned already that the department has no intention of implementing the first recommendation. VA will not realign its EEO director, so this person no longer oversees both EEO and personnel functions of the department. I'm just wondering if I understand this correctly.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Pappas. At this time, VA is not planning to realign the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion under the Deputy Secretary. As you know, the EEO Director for VA is the Assistant Secretary, HR and AOSP. She reports directly to the Deputy Secretary.
So let's get into the second one then.
Yes.
It's my understanding that the EEO program managers, the people that employees can go to in order to report sexual harassment, have already been realigned at the National Cemetery Administration and the Veterans Benefits Administration as well. But when it comes to VHA, the department no longer believes this realignment is necessary. I'm wondering if I have that right.
You are correct in that the realignment of VBA, NCA, and OIT are already complete. However, and this is breaking news, it's really as of today, we've got a new undersecretary, Dr. Effenal, and he was sworn in by the secretary this week. By the way, he took the white ribbon pledge, but also he is ready to put energy behind this recommendation and close it out. So we are going to start having discussions immediately with VHA to close out this recommendation of aligning those folks under the ORMDI. However, also that would require, if that happens, a statutory increase to the cap. We are capped right now at 406, so we would have to come back through this committee, as we have done before with VBA and NCA, to increase our cap from 406 to whatever that new number would be.
Okay, so I mean, if I'm hearing you right, there's a change here, and your commitment is there for VHA for this realignment, but it sounds like we've got some steps along the way to get to that end goal We always ask the question, when will this occur? Can you give us a time frame on when we'll see this realignment occur?
So, I'm sorry, is it too loud? We want to close this recommendation out, so he is new on board this week. I found this out today, so I've got to meet with the staff and come back with some timelines. We have been working proactively with the professional staff of this committee, and we will do that in an immediate follow-up.
Well, we want to work with you on that, and we want timelines. So
Absolutely.
let's get those as quickly as we can, and thank you for your cooperation there. Mr. Costa, maybe I could turn to you, and just in a practical sense, what will be the impact to VA employees if the department ignores that first priority recommendation that you talked about?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern here is that people will not see the EEO process as independent. We heard that when we talked to employees. We heard that when we talked to EEO personnel at the department and folks working on the HPP process. There are strong concerns that there needs to be more independence for the EEO process, because the person in charge of HR is also in charge of discipline and defending the department. And so if there are concerns that that person is going to not take an EEO complaint seriously because they're going to want to defend the department instead of pursuing that EEO complaint. So I think there's a real challenge here. I'm also concerned that the department has changed its mind several times on whether it concurs with this recommendation as well as our second recommendation. I'm heartened to hear that they're going to try to pursue the second recommendation now, but in the past they had disagreed and then disagreed again too. So I'm hopeful that there is a follow through there.
Well, thanks for those comments. And just to reiterate, there's bipartisan concern here among our committee members that VA isn't moving fast enough to fix some of these major structural issues that GAO and EEOC have identified. And it's the responsibility of you to do so. So we look forward to continuing to explore these issues through this hearing and beyond. And my time is up, so I want to turn things over to our next questioner, and that's Ranking Member Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, while I appreciate the department convening a working group on preventing a sexual assault and the creation of a sub-council of the VA enterprise governance, I worry that these types of efforts are bureaucratic and don't lead to real change. What change do you expect to see from these groups?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Mann. It's been a lot. So in the last 2 years, we have done a tremendous amount of work, and it is not focused strictly in the DC area. If you look at the Debra Sampson Act, and I'll start there, so thank you again for that, we now have directives, we have handbooks, and they mandate certain actions. They mandate required reporting. They mandate the process. So we now have a consistent process that is promulgated. We also have policies. The policies now are consistent because we established a governance council. Before, we had disparate offices that were working this. Now it all comes under a harassment prevention, assault prevention, survivor care subcouncil that's managed enterprise-wide. So we have governance on this. We now put remediation plans in place. So if a facility has 5 incidents of substantiated harassment or assault, now they have to complete a very strict remediation process that's approved by the medical facility, the VISN network or higher leadership comes up to our office. We work with it. So we have timelines on all this too to happen. We have done so much, I think, in the last 2 years to really combat this. And we do technical assistance reviews and compliance reviews in the field.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
Ranking
Ms.
Member
Abercrombie Johnson.
I also want to share, thank you for that question, the opportunity, but I also want to share that inside of our largest facility, you talk about employees not knowing that someone will be there to hear what their concerns are. We're so proud of the display, because sometimes just seeing a poster put up that you have a place to go and the designated points of contact, we now have a full cadre that have been trained as our designated points of contact that can hear those individuals that bring these concerns and then get those to the leadership. And we have that data to support what we've done with that, and the benefit is brought to our facilities at the hospitals. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Next question, again for you, Mr. Johnson. Organizational changes and position description and modifications are all good, but sexual harassment is not prevented by these things. Strong leaders and a moral culture are what prevents sexual harassment. VA leaders in facilities around the country carry the responsibility to protect, serve, and empower their staff. What is ORMDI doing to address this fundamental requirement in solving the sexual harassment problem?
So I think one of the first things we did is we made sure that now, as Ms. Johnson Abercrombie stated, we have points of contact at every facility. So those become force multipliers for us. They tell us what's happening on the ground. These things weren't in place 2 years ago. Through the governance, we meet bi-weekly, but then the work streams meet weekly. And again, this is not a headquarters thing. This is an enterprise level thing. I was just in Sacramento last week on a technical assistance review, looking at facilities. I was very pleased to see signage all around the facility on how to report things. I do believe, and we're starting to see, we will get increased numbers because, and I heard the comments in the opening statements about trust. We have built a program. Part of our sub-council includes strategic engagement and announcement, annual distribution letters, all these things. We are getting the word out, but now we've got to rely on those that experience harassment to feel safe, confident to come to us, but we have put a number of things in place.
Okay. Thank you. Follow-up would be to Mr. Costa, and I know we just have a minute left, but what best practices have you seen work to reduce and end sexual harassment in other agencies and organizations, and do you believe that those could be applied to VA?
Sir, I think one of the first things that should be done is looking at the alignment of their EEO process. As long as people and employees don't trust that process and have concerns about whether or not it's independent of either facility managers or HR, that process isn't going to work and people aren't going to report. As we discussed before, the MSPB survey data indicates that there's nearly 70,000 people that have experienced sexual harassment, but only several hundred are actually reporting any sexual harassment. So there's a pretty wide gulf there between what that survey data is suggesting and what VA is actually getting in its reporting.
Great. I see my time's expiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Mr. Johnson, the Harassment Preventive Program Handbook notes that managers should ensure corrective actions are taken. However, it does not provide procedures for managers to document evidence of corrective action or for your office to monitor that information. So can you talk a little bit about what steps VA is taking to ensure that corrective actions are resulting in assurances that complaints are documented and actually taking place?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman Brownlee. And the handbook actually does require for offices to report back to us whatever corrective actions were taken through the HPP process. So it's a 30-day business process. And if correct, once managers or whoever is conducting the fact-finding, the decision makers consult with ER, LR, general counsel, they can consult table of penalties. We've got all sorts of resources available. But then they have to get back to us, and we do track what happened. Were there any follow-ups? Yes.
And Congresswoman Bromley, we're also excited this year. We were just given access to Alert HR, so we can actually go in to the HR system to see if those corrective actions actually did occur. And that's handled at our departmental HPP office.
And so how are you assured that I hear you're saying the handbook says it's mandated, but how are you assured, what's the check and balance there to assure that all complaints are happening and that the mandate is being fulfilled?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're actually launching, a new initiative in August, is a compliance program. We already have one for EEO called Technical Assistance Reviews, but we're launching one now in August where we plan to hit at least coming out the gate about a dozen because we've already got some volunteers, but we also look at data. And if we see there are anomalies in that data, we can select the facility. But that program will look at the number of complaints, the policies. It looks at a number of things to make sure that they are consistent with what the handbook calls for and our program.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, during the 2020 hearing, I asked VA how over the course of 3 years, there were only 15 reports of sexual harassment that resulted in employee correction action. Since that hearing 2 years ago, how many reports of employee sexual harassment were filed, and how many of those resulted in documented corrective action?
So I could probably provide this to you better. I have some numbers here, but we do track. So we track everything from admonishments, demotions, removals, reprimands, suspensions. I have it broken down by quarter. I would be happy to provide that.
Okay, well, the GAO just alluded to the fact that, you know, in terms of these surveys and so forth, that the sexual harassment occurring within the VA is higher than I think most federal agencies, but yet the reported and documented, the reported actions and the documented corrective actions are relatively low. He talked about there's a pretty significant gulf. Do you agree with that? And do you see that as, you know, alarming that, you know, kind of, okay, we need to pay more attention to this?
I do agree that 2 years ago, this was a huge problem. However, I am seeing that a lot of these corrective things are now happening in the last 2 years. I know that GAO report looked at 2018, 19, 20, but as I stated in my opening comments, in the past 2 years, a lot of the things that, and I've got about 21 initiatives I could explain today, these things didn't exist. You know, we too saw, I read that study. You know, I'm embarrassed to see that because I have a lot of pride in VA. We are committed absolutely to turning this thing around and fixing it, and I think we are.
Okay, well, I mean, I hope what you're saying is true. I just feel as though, you know, I was very involved in the Debra Sampson bill. I feel like that there is a huge sense of urgency here. It's taking a long time to get to a place where we can actually say we have a zero-tolerance sexual harassment policy, and that the VA is really focused on this issue and building an environment for their employees that are safe and trusting. And I think the numbers tell us something. The data tells us something, and those numbers are important to know, to be able to tell ourselves how well we're doing. But also, it tells us we can learn from this data to find out what kinds of things we need to do in order to really address particular kinds of harassments that's taking place across the enterprise. So I just, you know, I still feel like that there's a lot of work ahead. I hear you, that you feel confident that you're on that road to successful completion, but I'll just say we're going to keep a strong eye on this because it's really important, and we really need that sense of urgency. So thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. I'll now recognize Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas and Ranking Member Mann, for holding this important hearing today. Thank you to the panel for your testimony. Putting an end to sexual harassment at the Department of Veterans Affairs is something we all wish we could hand wave and fix, but unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. Thankfully, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have never shied away from hard work when it comes to protecting our veterans and the staff that supports them. And I look forward to ensuring that VA is successfully implementing policies like those in the Debra Sampson Act, of which I'm proud to have supported since its early drafts all the way through passage, as well as addressing any additional gaps in policy or workplace culture surrounding harassment at VA. Mr. Johnson, why have so few employees participated in bystander intervention training? What are your plans to market this training for more employees?
So Congresswoman Radewagen, thank you for that question. First of all, before I even begin, thank you from the last time I spoke with you. We have done a lot for OCONUS and freely associated states on equity assessments. So just know that we are doing a lot of things there. But as far as bystander intervention training, it is a really neat program. It's a 35-minute interactive training that anyone can take online. For employees, it's mandatory. For veterans, we're trying to get as many veterans out there to take it. So one of the things we did is an annual distribution letter to all veterans. And I believe we hit close to 16 million veterans that were signed up. Either you got it through the mail or on email, depending on whichever your preference was. That's one way. The second way is through our strategic engagement work group as part of that new sub-council. We are working with the VSOs, tribal, and other stakeholders there. I would love to see more veterans take this. I think today we've had something like 16,000 clicks. So we are tracking it. We are also tracking through surveys, SurveyMonkey, their gender, age, what they liked most about the bystander techniques. So it's a great program, but I look for help from everyone that can hear my voice to make sure our veterans are taking that. You can go to our website and anyone can participate in the bystander intervention training.
So, Mr. Johnson, can you please tell us more about the work of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization to help grow veteran women-owned small businesses?
Absolutely, but I'll tell you, it's really an enterprise effort because, again, we've got the IDEAR Sub-Council, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. We work very, very closely with that organization, with the Center for Women Veterans. There's a number of organizations involved because, again, it's a governance effort. And we've got the MITRE group on board, and they are helping us do equity assessments to underserved communities. This is a fabulous initiative. We have rich data that we are starting to gather. Now we are in the process of turning those insights into actions.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize Mr. Bergman, General Bergman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lead by example, pretty simple. Marines, pretty much everybody in the military are pretty simple. Be that example. And after leadership, we know when you have a task, no matter what the task is, and you're trying to make it better, the culture of behavior that you promote, if you will, that you exemplify as a leader, goes a long way towards compliance. Not compliance because you have to, but compliance because you want to. And that truly is kind of unique. However, in any organization, especially one as broad and vast as the VA, you, in some cases, get the behavior you inspect, not the behavior you expect at times, and that it is what it is. So, Mr. Johnson, leaders do set the tone. The culture of an organization, from a small office to something as large as the VA, is dictated by what the leaders do, what behavior they allow from their staff. How do you and your office work to correct the leadership failures and support those good leaders working to correct bad culture?
So General Congressman Bergman, thank you for that question. As a former infantry officer, I understand, follow me, do as I do, and I think we've exhibited that today. When we came here, one of the first things we started doing is passing out white ribbons and signing up people to pledge. That's because we are committed. Everywhere we go, we do allyship. I am looking for everybody to be a partner. I do a lot of speaking engagements at conferences, at training events. I travel quite often. My staff travels often. We've got so many people committed to this that want to do the right thing. One of the biggest challenges I have, and it's actually a great challenge, is we get a lot of volunteers. How can I help? How can I help? And we've got to figure out through the Governance Council how we bring, and I'm going to call them again, force multipliers in to get them engaged. There are a number of people, starting with the Secretary.
Cut you short here, but along that line, because VISNs kind of operate independently, And now you got the, the head shed, the corporate VA, if you will, but then the VISNs, any issues there that you have had to confront because one VISN did it one way, another VISN did it a different way?
I don't believe that exists anymore. I have not had an issue because, again, we have standard policies and procedures, starting with handbooks and directives. I have not found that to be an issue. And when we do technical assistance reviews, the VISNs are always involved. So we build those partnerships.
Thank you. Mr. Costa, do you believe that the VA is effectively correcting leadership failures, and is VA taking the proper steps to support good leaders working to correct bad culture? Your comments, please.
Yes, sir. We believe that there's more to be done. The misalignment of the EEO functions, as I mentioned before, is a big issue. It is a large impediment to people feeling comfortable coming forward with their concerns and their complaints. And without that information, the department doesn't have the ability to address that information as effectively as it could. I'm pleased that the department is taking action on 3 of our 5 recommendations, and it sounds like they're going to start taking action on a 4th. But we still think a lot more needs to be done there. And we'll continue to monitor VA's progress in those areas. But again, I really would emphasize that the structural issues are not insignificant. And speaking to having one unified model, having VHA handle EEO complaints differently than the rest of the agency is one way in which things are not unified. And there's we'll have to monitor that to see how the department moves forward with that and when it can implement VHA operating in the same way as the rest of the department.
Well, thank you. I see my time is running short here. Sense of urgency. There is zero tolerance for any type of this behavior because it is negative and detrimental to any culture and to the dignity of the men and women who serve and those who serve those who served. So thank you for not stopping. And it'll never end, but you can stem it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, General Bergman. I'll now yield to Representative Custer, who is a guest of this subcommittee. Welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Pappas, and thank you for allowing me to wave on for this important hearing. 4 years ago, the Merit Systems Protection Board came out with its survey detailing how VA employees faced higher levels of sexual harassment than in any other department in the federal government. No one should have to go to work and be subjected to harassment and made to feel unsafe. And frankly, this is unacceptable in the VA because their medical and support staff cannot provide the very best care for our veterans when they face this kind of mistreatment. After that survey, my Republican colleague, General Bergman, and I teamed up and tasked the GAO to study the VA and publish a report on how addressing sexual harassment affects the VA workforce. I appreciate that some steps have been taken in the past 2 years since the report came out, but I'm concerned that more progress has not been made. It's imperative that all of GAO's recommendations be fully implemented and as quickly as possible, and I echo the urgency that General Bergman has stated today. However, there's more to be done. To understand the urgency, we don't have to look any further than a second MSPB survey that was conducted last year. The findings are that VA employees still report experiencing significant higher levels of harassment, around 17% than the federal government average. Compare that response to the only 440 complaints of harassment filed by VA employees last year in a department of over 405,000 people. The discrepancy is stark, and I would argue the only realistic way to read this vast underreporting of complaints is that employees still don't have the confidence that the VA will resolve this behavior. And with that in mind, let me turn to our panel. A major deficiency found in the 2020 GAO report was that harassment complaints weren't being centrally compiled. Thankfully, that's now changing. Mr. Johnson, how are the VA supervisors being made aware that they must centrally report complaints of sexual harassment they receive to your office, or what are the repercussions if they do not?
Thank you for those questions, Congresswoman Custer. I'm going to start with those facility points of contact. They're in every facility. They are our eyes and ears on the ground. Those are the folks that are involved. Those folks know to get it to us within 42 business days, 48 hours. That's where it starts.
And is it clear that swift accountability is essential to demonstrate to employees that something will be done about the harassing behavior? Do you think that principle has gotten through at the institution level?
I absolutely do, and I believe that because of Secretary McDonough and his leadership and Deputy Secretary Remy. They have talked about this more than anyone I've ever seen.
Good.
I mean, yes.
As well they should.
And ma'am, can I yield to my
Yes.
colleague?
Representative Custer, the other thing that we've done too that's different is at our departmental level, we are actually notifying our senior level officials if those harassment allegations are not addressed inside the time limit, and we're reporting them. We're reporting it up not only to those that are in charge of facility, but to our DAS that goes up to our secretary in a report. So they're being called out if they're not operating appropriately.
And I think the accountability is so critical. Mr. Costa, one of GAO's recommendations was that the VA do a better job of making sure that corrective actions are taken in instances where sexual harassment has been substantiated. Do you have a perspective on any progress VA has made in this regard since the report came out?
Yes, Congresswoman. So the VA has made it clear in its HPP handbook that managers should ensure that corrective actions are taken. So that is a step forward. What our concerns are there is that it does not lay out exactly what sort of documentation needs to be provided or evidence to show that action has been taken. We have seen in the past with government agencies where somebody says that action has been taken, but then when you actually go look, they thought about it, but they never actually did it or whatever. So our concern here is just to make sure that there is sufficient documentation to show that actions actually have been taken to create a trusting environment for employees. One of the things that we heard in our previous work were that employees did not feel there was accountability for sexual harassment. And so I think it's critically important that there's not just the reporting, but there's evidence to prove that the corrective action has been taken.
Well, thank you, and I would just, again, call on General Bergman. I know Representative Brownlee is working on this, but the urgency and the accountability is key, and thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I think we've gone through the list, but I have a couple more, so maybe we'll go for a second round here. For the witnesses, I think you're all aware, last year I introduced a bill, H.R. 2704. It's the Improving VA Accountability to Prevent Sexual Harassment and Discrimination Act. It's a bipartisan bill. Passed the House. It would require some of the structural changes that GAO and the EEOC have called for. It addresses employee training, case tracking, updated harassment prevention policies. Mr. Costa, does GAO see the need for the legislation that I put forward that we still hope can make it through the Senate?
Sir, we have not had a chance to fully review the legislation, but we are definitely appreciate that it does include a number of our recommendations and would codify those recommendations, such as making the program managers at the VA facilities report to ORMDI and that the managers receive harassment training and so forth. So we appreciate that very much.
Yep, I think there's an alignment of missions between the legislation and your recommendations, so we appreciate those comments. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson-Abercrombie, I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on the bill in the department's eyes. Does this clarify what Congress would like to see in terms of VA's anti-harassment reporting structure?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Pappas. I have seen the bill. I'm familiar with it, but we have to discuss that with our leadership.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep pushing for it, and as I said, this bill's passed the House. It's bipartisan, and I think it's reflective of the themes that you're hearing from members here today. Maybe I could just ask another quick one about the handbook that the Harassment Prevention Handbook, which is newly released by the department earlier this year. According to the handbook, supervisors have a duty to separate parties within 1 business day upon receipt of an allegation of sexual harassment. And during the separation, I'm wondering, are complainants able to request a transfer of unit or even facility? And can they request paid leave, or is remote work generally an option while an investigation is running its course?
Thank you for that question. Generally, we have an interactive process where the manager will sit down with the alleger, the alleged harasser, consult ER, LR, all those things. And in that interactive process, those questions can be asked and solutions found. It's unique for each situation, but to answer your question, yes, they want to immediately separate them while we do the fact-finding, but then and offer whatever relief we can. It's first and foremost, it is to make sure that the harassment has stopped and that the employee is safe.
Can you address the issue of confidentiality as well? I know the handbook underscores that point, but from a practical standpoint, I'm just wondering what that means in that process. Who has to be notified that a complaint has been made, and what is your office's role in making sure that a complainant doesn't face retaliation or reprisal as a result?
So there's two forms that they can contact us. One is through the EEO process, and we are the only office that can process an EEO complaint in the department, ORMDI. I say that the integrity of that process is strictly maintained. No one else can see that, whether it's HR or anyone else. We own that process. In the harassment prevention process, which is more preventative, because the EEO is for more severe cases and can lead to monetary, non-monetary, we work with fact finders. So they report it to us, and it's a need to know. We do obviously have to interview key witnesses, et cetera, but again, it's a need to know.
Okay. Can you address the issue of these volunteer fact finders that are trained to conduct investigations? And VA's policy, to me, is unclear on when supervisors are supposed to utilize these volunteer fact finders versus conducting an investigation themselves. Can you shed any light on that issue?
Absolutely. So one of the things we did, and again, thank you for giving us 22 more harassment prevention coordinators, because that's a big help, but even that's not enough. So what we've done is we've sought volunteers, and we train them through the Law Enforcement Training Center, LETC. And I believe, last I checked, we had, I think, 400 folks that were signing up for that training. That way it's consistent training, and we know what these fact finders have. And what that does is it gives us a cadre of inspectors, fact finders, that can go out there and do these things and report back to us.
Okay. Thanks for those clarifications. I appreciate that. Ranking Member Mann, you're recognized.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Costa, how best can GAO and this committee track if VA's efforts to prevent sexual harassment are meeting the mark?
Sir, I think, looking at all the sources of data is going to be the best way. VA is collecting data, as Mr. Johnson said, on a number of different aspects, and that's good. We can track the number of HPP complaints, the number of EEOC complaints. We would also like the department to also analyze the MSPB data, which we've analyzed twice, because we think there's something to be found there, right? We found that there's 17% in the last 2 years that have reported having sexual harassment of some nature, but we're only seeing several hundred sorts of complaints or fewer in a given year. So there's a disparity there, and I think that analyzing that data is of critical importance. I know the department is doing some of that. We'd like to see some more.
Thank you. And for you, Mr. Johnson, somewhat similar, but what metrics should we be examining to determine if your efforts to eliminate harassment in the department are working?
So, Ranking Member Mann, thank you for that. I believe the data tells the narrative. So we have data now. We've got disparate systems. We report to you. I think our last report was sent up December 24th. We analyze that data. We have data scientists on board that look at that data. The other thing we're doing, and this is one of our newer initiatives, is we have an enterprise unifying dashboard coming out in FY23, and we have an enterprise unifying solution, enterprise system, that will stand down all these legacy systems. I believe we're targeting Q2 of FY24. So right now, we've got, disparate systems. They're a little bit dated, but we're about to build something, much more savvy, and I think that is imminent.
And what metrics in that would you actually be tracking? Because my experience is there's all sorts of data you can collect. You can get overwhelmed with data, but what you got to kind of drill into? What are the metrics and the key things that we need to be looking at?
I think one of the key things for us is we're going to look at what happened, where it happened. We look at the narrative, why it's happening. Is it criminal? Is it a intellectual disability type thing? And those are the kind of things we pare down on and study. Also, if it's happening in a certain region, is it something spilling into that region? What's causing it? I really think we're looking at this from so many ways.
Okay. Last question again for you, Mr. Johnson. In your written testimony, and again, a little bit ago, you mentioned the VA recently sent 16 million letters to veterans telling them about the department's anti-harassment and sexual assault policy. I understand that you were required to do that because of the Debra Sampson Act. I've heard from veterans that were a little confused by why they were receiving it and found it to be overly bureaucratic and not very helpful. I guess in your mind, what was in the letter? Do you think it was helpful? And at what cost was that sent? We sent 16 million letters. Just some questions regarding that.
Sure thing. So this was the first time that I recall us doing that in my tenure. We did send it out. That was the first. So we're looking for feedback because we're looking to do it again this year. It went out as a trifold because I received one. And it talked about bystander intervention training, zero tolerance, all those things. So I appreciate that feedback. We appreciate all the feedback we receive. And we will pivot as necessary.
Great. I have no further questions. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Chairwoman Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, I wanted to sort of follow up on my last line of questioning. So, we were talking about how the data that VA collects, helps the VA to better understand the trends and sexual harassment. Now that your processes have improved, can you talk a little bit about what you would say that some of the trends are with regard to sexual harassment?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. One of the things we looked at, and I looked at a facility that is now participating in our remediation program, and I wanted to see why. Leela Jackson and I have been studying this. And in one case, we had someone who had an intellectual disability inappropriately grab healthcare providers, and they did it 3 times. Now, they did it in such a short period that's why it happened 3 times. It's not like it happened over a period of months. It happened in a short period. We got 3 complaints. We look at that kind of stuff. We also look at, is it just bad behavior or criminal? Because, I'm disgusted by it. I don't understand why it happens today. So I'm always looking for why offenders do this and what's causing it. We look at the reports to see who's doing it and why. I don't know if that answers your question, but we do.
It doesn't really.
Okay.
I mean, I can't imagine that somebody with an intellectual disability is a trend. And then after that example, you keep saying that you're looking at it. You don't have tolerance for it. But I'm just wondering if you can articulate specific trends.
I think some of the trends we would see, and that's some of the corrective action I think we've taken, is I've heard things like, hey baby, or you're too pretty to be a veteran. Those are things that some folks didn't realize was offensive. If you go to our facilities now, we have posters that say that's not acceptable. So if you talk about trends, and one of the trends I'll talk about, because it's something I look for, and I'll call it the hallway of shame, where folks just conjugate, and if someone walks by, something is said. we have done a number of things to correct those, everything from turning chairs, making sure that people don't conjugate in an open area or a common area. That's where a lot of things happen, I believe. That's where I think it starts. And every time I walk a facility, I walk through those areas, and I am looking for it and ready to apply bystander intervention training.
You've talked a lot about the fact that we now have standard policies and procedures in the handbook. And I think the GAO concurs that, that's a strong step in the right direction. But it still sounds like the sort of the standardization around documentation and sort of a standard procedure that action has been taken doesn't seem to be necessarily in place. And the VA is such a huge enterprise. The challenge always is, how to scale something across the organization that is consistent across the organization. So I think if I'm understanding the GAO correctly, I think, they're looking for, that standardization, if you will, of documentation and a procedure that action has been taken. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, and I also wanted to yield to my colleague, but I'll start off with the subcouncil on this topic is really the governance that's making it standardized now. That is in place. We can become more sophisticated, but it is in our handbook, what forms they are supposed to send to us, electronic notices and everything else. But Perdita, would you like to add more on that?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. One of the things that we've also done in those instances, as Mr. Johnson's described at the hospitals, if we have an individual that is grabbing or inappropriately touching one of our team members, that case is referred to our Disruptive Behavior Committee, and each case is looked at individually. If, in fact, that this behavior type continues, that veteran is addressed, and either they are escorted to their appointment, or they may have to find their medical care at another VA facility if we can't get that. So that's part of that Debra Sampson Act, that we're able to do that and have those individuals available now to us. And with the additional staff that Debra Sampson also afforded us with the Harassment Prevention Committee, we're gonna, coordinators will have more people on site to build a presence. So you'll be able to see more statistics and a change in the behaviors because we have those precautionary things put in place.
Thank you for that. And just one last note is on this white ribbon pledge. I think it's always good to have a campaign to raise awareness. I just want to make sure it's not a campaign to window dress something that's, that we're not working hard at correcting.
I would say it this way. We are manifesting a new reality. We are talking about this stuff. It is real. I do believe it. Now, we're still going to have some bad behaviors. Some people are going to act inappropriate, but they've got to be dealt with swiftly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Either for Mr. Johnson or Ms. Perdita Johnson, Abercrombie. Secretary Wilkie, 2 years ago, in response to a letter I sent him on this topic, stated unequivocally that the EEO managers at VA hospitals would be realigned under the office that you all lead, contingent upon the availability of funds. Of course, this would address two of the GAO priority recommendations. As far as I can tell, VA has not requested funding for this transition in any of the budget cycles since. I want to know why you think that's the case, and when will this realignment be included in the department's annual budget request?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Takano. So the new Undersecretary for Health was sworn in this week, and the decision was made to try to close this recommendation out. We will work actively with Veterans Health Administration on this. We've already got some work on it, and we'll also work with this subcommittee and your professional staff to do this.
Well, as you know, budgeting is about priorities. It tells you what you're about. When we see something not included in the budget, the message often ends up becoming that this is not a priority of yours. So I hope we can see stronger signals from the department that this is a priority. For Mr. Johnson, I want to touch on the Merit Systems Protection Board's latest survey results showing that 17% of VA employees experienced some form of sexual harassment in the prior 2 years. With more than 400,000 department employees, this data indicates there have been tens of thousands of workers who have been subjected to inappropriate or prohibited conduct. Yet, in the year ending on July 1, 2021, fewer than 500 VA employees have come forward with former sexual harassment complaints. How do you account for the discrepancy?
So thank you for that question, Chairman Takano. I would tell you that we have built a program now, and I do see that those numbers will exponentially grow, because I do feel that those numbers are starting to grow. So before we had disparate systems, our office has always been doing this for the last 5 years, but now we've brought everybody together. I think you will see that people will start to utilize this program.
All right, well, it certainly, as of now, I don't think we all believe that fewer than 500 VA employees have been harassed or have had issues.
So you're right, and it's actually more than that. If I look at Q2 of this year, because that's my latest data, I'll get Q3 here soon, we're above 500 now. We're at about 600. And I've told folks that to me is going to speak to folks know that we now have a program in place. So do not be alarmed when you see those numbers go up, because I do think that when you build something, people will start to utilize it, and we will start to get the message out, zero tolerance.
Well, thank you. Mr. Costa, would you like to respond to this question as well?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I'm hopeful that that the department's efforts are going to be successful, and I would expect that if they are, that I agree that you would see an increase in the number of complaints coming in. I do think that there, as I mentioned before, the structural issue I think is a significant impediment to people coming forward. We heard repeatedly in our past work that people felt that there was not accountability, and I think as long as the EEO program managers at VHA are responding to facility managers, there's a challenge there. I think as long as Mr. Johnson has to report up through four layers of management to get to the secretary, I think there's a challenge there as well. And I think the department needs to address both of those. Like I said, I'm heartened to hear that the department has changed its mind this morning on realigning the VHA EEO program managers. And I hope that we see follow through on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Johnson or Ms. Johnson Abercrombie, do you have anything to say about any additional resources or authorities that you need in order to improve VA's handling of sexual harassment complaints?
I believe right now this committee has been very generous to us. We are in the process now of bringing on 36 new EEO counselors, 22 harassment prevention specialists, 12 DNI. I think we have what we need. When we get to that, we will reassess again what we need. But right now, we are very happy with that, the numbers that you have given us.
All right. Do you have anything else to add? No? All right. I yield back to Mr. Chair.
Thank you. No, I think we are fine. And again, as we work on the realignment of the VHA staff, the DAS will be back to ask for the additional cap.
Well, thank you. Seeing no further questions from members, Ranking Member Mann, would you like to offer any closing comments here?
Well, thanks for doing this, and clearly we have a lot of work in front of us still. Feel like, we've got to see leadership, commitment, we got to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly agree with that statement. And Mr. Johnson, I appreciate the news today about the realignment that you mentioned, and certainly we're going to want to hear from the Deputy Secretary himself, confirming that and ensuring that that is going to move forward. And again, on timelines, we would appreciate some further information on when that will fully be executed. So I think today's hearing has shown some progress that's been made over the last couple years at the Department of Veterans Affairs, but this hearing has also underscored how additional reform is needed to remove real or perceived conflicts of interest that may be discouraging employees from reporting sexual harassment. I want to reiterate that these structural deficiencies merit the attention of senior leaders at the department, and so we look forward to continuing to work with you both, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson Abercrombie, as well as with Deputy Secretary Remy and others to ensure that longstanding GAO recommendations, EEOC directives, and provisions of federal law are not ignored. Mr. Costa, thank you as well for joining us. We look forward to continued engagement with GAO, and thank you to all of today's witnesses for participating. Really pleased as well that the Women's Veterans Task Force was represented here by Chairwoman Brownlee. So all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include any extraneous material. And so now this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.